Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has delivered his strongest rejection yet of the upcoming Trump-Putin summit. And the message is crystal clear. Ukraine will not surrender a single inch of its territory to Russia.
Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real solutions that can bring peace. Solutions that are against us, solutions that are without Ukraine, are simultaneously solutions against peace. They will not achieve anything. These are dead solutions.
The Ukrainian leader's defiance comes at a pivotal moment, as any peace deal made without Ukraine at the table will be nothing more than a dead solution that will never work. As Trump prepares to meet Putin in Alaska on Friday, August 15th, the stakes couldn't be higher.
Of course, given security concerns, given logistics, it could slide to the week after. President Trump saying he wanted this to happen as soon as possible.
All right, Kristen Holmes for us at the White House. Very fluid situation. Suspect we'll probably be coming back to you at some point in the hour. Let's go now to CNN senior international correspondent Fred Blanken in Moscow. Fred, what are you hearing from the Kremlin about this potential meeting?
Well, first of all, the Russians are saying that they are really in the process of preparing this meeting and have been over the past couple of days. It really seems as though Steve Witkoff's meeting with President Putin here in Moscow on August 6th on Wednesday certainly got a lot of things going here in the Kremlin. That also possibly paired, by the way, with some of that sanctions pressure or potential sanctions pressure that the Russians were feeling from the Trump administration. One of the interesting things that we've seen today here, Phil, is as the Russians were saying that they were preparing for this meeting with President Trump, where, again, they also say they're not exactly sure when that meeting is going to be. They are saying that they're aiming for next week. They were also at the beginning saying that a summit venue had been agreed upon but would be announced at a later date, but then sort of backed off from that as well. At the same time as all of that was going on, Vladimir Putin of Russia was also having some high-stakes calls with some of his main allies and some of those countries that have been put under pressure by the United States. In fact, today he spoke with Xi Jinping of China, the leader of China, where at the end of that conversation, the Russians said that Putin had briefed Xi Jinping on the talks that he had with Steve Witkoff and on the possible summit that he was going to have with President Trump as well. And according to the Russian readout, Xi Jinping said that he was glad that the diplomatic process was now moving forward. Obviously, President Trump had also threatened the Chinese with secondary tariffs if they continue to buy Russian oil, and the Russians, of course, continue the conflict in Ukraine. Also had a conversation, Vladimir Putin, with Narendra Modi of India as well. Of course, the president has been singling out India over the past couple of days for possible higher tariffs if they continue to buy Russian.
The president has confirmed this historic meeting will take place at a location he describes as very popular for a lot of reasons, marking the first in-person encounter between American and Russian leaders since the invasion began. This is a high-stakes diplomatic showdown that could determine the future of Ukraine and the entire European security order. So what's really happening behind closed doors? And why is Zelensky so adamant that Ukraine cannot be sidelined from these crucial talks? To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to look at how we got here and what's really at stake. The announcement of the Trump-Putin summit came after months of escalating tensions and failed deadlines. Trump had initially given Putin 50 days to agree to a ceasefire, then shortened it to just 10 days, expressing his growing frustration with the Russian leader. That deadline passed on Friday, August 9th, with no ceasefire agreement. Instead, Trump announced something that caught many by surprise. He would host Vladimir Putin on American soil, specifically in Alaska, for what could be the most consequential diplomatic meeting in decades. The choice of Alaska as the venue is deeply symbolic. This is the same territory that Russia sold to the United States in 1867 for just $7.2 million, what many called Seward's folly at the time. Now, 158 years later, Putin is returning to this former Russian territory to potentially negotiate what could be described as the land deal of the 21st century. But there's a crucial problem with this summit. Ukraine, the country whose future is being decided, may not even have a seat at the table. Trump's announcement made no mention of Zelensky's participation, and Putin has consistently insisted on bilateral talks with the United States, effectively trying to sideline Ukraine from decisions about its own territory. This is exactly what Zelensky warned against in his forceful response. Any decisions that are without Ukraine are at the same time decisions against peace. They will not bring anything. These are dead decisions. They will never work. The Ukrainian president went even further, making it absolutely clear that Ukraine's territorial integrity is non-negotiable. Ukraine will not give Russia any awards for what it has done. Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. These aren't just diplomatic talking points. They reflect Ukraine's constitutional commitment to its territorial integrity and the deep-seated determination of the Ukrainian people to resist Russian aggression. But what makes this situation even more complex is Trump's suggestion that any peace deal would involve some swapping of territories. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump indicated that the agreement would include territorial exchanges to the betterment of both countries.
Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow or whatever.
The president acknowledged the complexity of the situation, noting that both Russians and Ukrainians have been fighting over these territories for 3.5 years. However, the mathematics of this proposed swap reveals just how lopsided it would be. Ukraine currently controls only about 4 square miles of Russian territory in the western Kursk region, a tiny fraction of what they seized during their offensive in August 2024. Meanwhile, Russia controls approximately 1/5 of Ukraine's sovereign territory, including Crimea, which it illegally annexed in 2014, and large portions of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. The disparity is staggering. Any swap would essentially mean Ukraine giving up vast swaths of its territory in exchange for tiny slivers of Russian land. This is why Zelensky and Ukrainian officials view such proposals as fundamentally unjust and unacceptable. The timing of this summit is also crucial. It comes after Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, met with Putin in Moscow for 3 hours on Wednesday, August 6th. According to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, this meeting produced the first concrete proposal from Russia about what it would require to end the war. However, reports suggest that Putin's demands remain as maximalist as ever. Ukraine must cede the entire Donbass region and accept permanent neutrality, effectively being banned from ever joining NATO. European leaders are watching these developments with growing alarm.
European allies of Ukraine have called for more pressure on Russia ahead of Friday's summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. The group, which includes Britain, France and Germany, said Ukraine must be involved in decisions about a path to peace. Overnight, they issued a joint statement saying the path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine, adding, "We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force." Well, President Zelensky, who's already ruled out handing over any land to Russia in exchange for peace, has been consulting his European allies in the lead-up to Friday's talks in Alaska. As it stands, Mr. Zelensky has not been invited to those talks, and the White House have said that there are currently no plans for that to change. However, they did confirm that President Trump was open, as they say, to have trilateral talks in Alaska.
Britain, France, and Germany have called for more pressure on Russia ahead of the summit, issuing a joint statement emphasizing their unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. They fear a repeat of historical appeasement, drawing comparisons to Neville Chamberlain's failed attempts to negotiate with Nazi Germany in 1938. The concern is that bilateral talks between Trump and Putin could result in a deal that sacrifices Ukrainian sovereignty for the appearance of peace. The statement, signed by leaders from France, Britain, Italy, Germany, Poland, Finland, and the European Union, insisted that the path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine. The geopolitical implications of this summit extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. If Putin succeeds in gaining international legitimacy for his territorial conquests through negotiations with the United States, it could set a dangerous precedent for other authoritarian leaders around the world. It would essentially signal that borders can be changed through force and that aggression can be rewarded through diplomacy. For Putin, this summit represents a potential diplomatic victory regardless of the outcome. The very fact that he's being hosted on American soil by the U.S. president gives him the international legitimacy he's been seeking since the invasion began. Russian officials have already suggested that a follow-up summit could take place in Russia, further normalizing Putin's position on the international stage. From Trump's perspective, the summit represents his attempt to fulfill his campaign promise to end the war in Ukraine quickly. However, the reality on the ground has proven far more complex than his initial 24-hour timeline suggested. The war has now dragged on for over 3 years, with hundreds of thousands of casualties and massive destruction across Ukraine. The human cost of this conflict cannot be understated.
Who is holding up this Ukraine ceasefire summit? Is it Putin or is it Zelensky?
Well, I think it's that one is, as you know, we've been working on a lot of these deals. We've closed every single one of them all throughout the world, and that's the last of them. And they're losing, Peter, about 6,000, maybe even 7,000 soldiers every single week. Russia, as you know, lost almost 25,000 over the last month and a half, and Ukraine lost just a small number, fewer. It's a lot of people are dying, and I think we're getting very close. And we're going to be announcing later on. We're going to have a meeting with Russia. We'll start off with Russia, and we'll announce a location. I think the location will be a very popular one for a lot of reasons. But we'll be announcing that a little bit later. I just don't want to do it now because of the importance of what we just did. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Follow-up. Are you surprised that Zelensky hasn't figured out by now, in years of war, how to deal with you and to deal with Putin without needing permission to make concessions from his parliament or from a national referendum?
Well, he's going out and getting what he needs. You know, he's not authorized to do certain things. I said, well, you're going to have to get it fast because, you know, we're getting very close to a deal. And he's doing that, and he's working with the European nations, and they're terrific people, terrific leaders, NATO. And as you know, I became...
The president himself has acknowledged that approximately 6,000 to 7,000 soldiers are dying weekly, with Russia losing nearly 25,000 in just the past month and a half. He describes the tragic destruction of cultural sites and infrastructure, noting that millions of people have died. Every day that the war continues, more Ukrainian civilians lose their lives to Russian missile attacks. Just in recent weeks, Russia has intensified its strikes on civilian infrastructure, schools, and hospitals, actions that Trump himself has called disgusting and disgraceful. This is partly why Trump's approach to Putin has hardened in recent months. The president has imposed tariffs on countries like India that continue to buy Russian oil, and has threatened even more severe economic measures. However, critics argue that these sanctions haven't been enough to fundamentally change Putin's calculus about the war. The question now is whether Trump's meeting with Putin will result in meaningful progress toward peace, or simply provide Putin with a propaganda victory. Zelensky's strong rejection of territorial concessions suggests that any deal made without Ukraine's consent would face immediate resistance from Kyiv and its European allies. There are also reports that the White House is considering inviting Zelensky to Alaska, potentially creating a trilateral meeting. However, this remains uncertain, and Putin has consistently preferred bilateral talks with the United States, viewing this as a way to elevate Russia's status as a global superpower while marginalizing Ukraine's voice in the process. The stakes couldn't be higher. This summit could determine whether Ukraine maintains its sovereignty and territorial integrity, or whether it's forced to accept a peace that legitimizes Russian aggression and occupation. It could also reshape the entire post-World War II international order, which has been based on the principle that borders cannot be changed by force. Zelensky's defiant stance reflects not just his personal position, but the will of the Ukrainian people who have endured 3 years of brutal war rather than submit to Russian domination. Ukrainian public opinion polls consistently show strong opposition to any territorial concessions, even in exchange for peace. The Ukrainian constitution explicitly prohibits ceding territory to foreign powers, and any leader who agreed to such concessions would face intense domestic opposition. For Ukraine, this isn't just about territory, it's about survival as an independent nation. Giving up large portions of the country would not only reward Russian aggression, but could also make Ukraine economically and strategically unviable. The occupied territories include some of Ukraine's most valuable agricultural and industrial regions, as well as crucial access to the Black Sea. The international community is also divided on how to approach this summit. While some hope it could lead to a breakthrough in ending the war, others worry that it could result in a deal that sacrifices Ukrainian interests for the sake of U.S.-Russia relations. The European Union and NATO allies have made it clear that they will not accept any agreement that doesn't respect Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereign rights. As we approach the August 15th summit date, the diplomatic maneuvering is intensifying. Ukrainian officials are working frantically to ensure their voice is heard, while Russian diplomats are pushing for the bilateral format that would give them maximum leverage. American officials are caught in the middle, trying to balance Trump's desire for a quick diplomatic victory with the reality of Ukrainian resistance and European concerns. The outcome of this summit could redefine European security for decades to come. If Putin succeeds in legitimizing his territorial gains through negotiations with the United States, it could embolden other authoritarian leaders to pursue similar aggressive actions. Conversely, if the summit fails to produce meaningful results, it could lead to an escalation of the conflict and further deterioration in U.S.-Russia relations. Zelensky's message is clear. Ukraine will not be a passive observer in decisions about its own future. The country has fought too hard and sacrificed too much to simply accept whatever deal emerges from a Trump-Putin meeting. As he stated emphatically, Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier.
Any decisions that are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, are at the same time decisions against peace. They will not achieve anything. These are dead solutions. They will never work.
Right. So is that just an opening negotiation?
The coming days will reveal whether this diplomatic gamble pays off for Trump or whether Zelensky's warnings about dead solutions prove prophetic. One thing is certain. The future of Ukraine, and potentially the entire international order, hangs in the balance as these three leaders navigate one of the most complex diplomatic challenges of the 21st century. The world will be watching Alaska on August 15th as history unfolds in real time.